So sometimes when a new version of a software comes out, there's different changes that are made that have unintended consequences to the way that the software works. This is how I feel about one of the additions that's been made in SketchUp 2022. So let's talk about it. So a lot of you are aware of the clipping plane issue that's existed inside of SketchUp. Basically what it is when you start dealing with larger models, like this one, for example, and you zoom in, you start getting pieces of your model that are clipped out by the camera. And so this is very clearly an issue, right? Because when you get in here and you can't even click on your model to work on it, then that makes SketchUp unusable in some situations, and it's very frustrating. And there's no easy way to fix this, at least there wasn't built into the program. So that's kind of the issue that SketchUp had, and they're trying to fix it. And so it's worth noting that this is an issue in all or most 3D software, and it has to do with the threshold at which your model is set up, or your camera view is set up to start and stop working. So in Blender, for example, in your view options, your camera has a clipping length that you can set like this. So notice what I can do is I can drag the beginning of the start and the end of my camera view just like this. So if I get closer, notice how you can set this to have a start clip, so your camera's going to start at a certain length. And note that this doesn't mean that Blender handles this better, it just handles it manually. So basically what it says is you set your camera clipping, right? You set your camera start and your camera end, which is one of the things that can make Blender less intuitive than SketchUp, is it doesn't do it automatically. Because what SketchUp is trying to do is it's trying to set your camera clipping based on where your camera is in a 3D space automatically. This has to happen if you have a camera that's in a 3D space. And when your models get really large, like geographically speaking, other things like that, or when you have situations where your model axes or your object are way away from your model, SketchUp doesn't know how to interpret that. That's what causes the clipping plane issue. All right, so in SketchUp 2022, they've noted that they've made improvements to the clipping inside of SketchUp. And so what they've done is they've set it up where either you can make this work by switching to the parallel projection camera view. And so basically when you switch to parallel projection, it resets that clipping so that you don't have it inside of your view. Note that it's still in there in perspective view. It's not in there in parallel projection view. So the other option that they've set up in here is they've also set it up where if you enable hiding the rest of your model in your components, so if you get a window, model info, and you click on fade rest of model, notice how what that's going to do is now when you double click in here, it's going to reset your camera zoom or your camera clipping based on the object that you have located in here. So that does sort of solve the clipping issue, I guess, except that you do have to work in parallel projection mode in these larger models in order to make that work. However, this improvement has led to an unintended consequence of removing a feature that many people were using to quickly add elevation views inside of SketchUp. See, back in SketchUp 2020-21 and earlier, what a lot of people were doing to avoid adding like dozens of different section planes to their buildings is we could switch our camera to parallel projection mode, and then we could use the first person camera and create a view along an axis in order to quickly create an elevation view. Well, notice how we did that. What this does is this is clipping out everything behind that camera location that we set. That seems to be a pretty logical way for this to work, right? You set your camera location you set your camera in a certain location, looking forward in parallel projection mode. Why would you see anything behind the camera location? So this was something that we could use in order to quickly create these elevation views without having to add a bunch of section planes, which makes our models a lot more manageable. However, if we jump into SketchUp 2022 and try to do the same thing with parallel projection turned on, now what happens is the clipping no longer occurs, which is very odd and also very frustrating, because why would the camera, when we set it to first person camera mode and parallel projection, show things that are behind the camera location? So now what happens is if you try to use the position camera tool in order to set up an elevation, it no longer works. So this is taking away a feature that a lot of people have been using in order to quickly create their elevation views. Just looking at a house like this one, there's literally dozens of locations where you might want to create an elevation view. Now you have to add a section plane and manage all of those section planes for all of those different views, which if you've worked with the different section planes can be a little bit frustrating to try to manage. So I don't really understand why this is the solution that was put into place. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So if I'm in perspective mode and I set my camera right here to look at this kitchen, it's going to work, right? It's going to take I'm going to want to turn my field of view down obviously, but you're going to be able to see everything that was in front of that camera location inside of this camera view, which is something that makes total sense to me. When you set our camera up in a certain location, you'd be able to look forward. So why wouldn't you be able to do that in parallel projection mode? So I understand that this is a solution that's being put in place to fix this issue, but in my opinion, what this is doing, the consequence of this is it's making another tool not make sense anymore. It's making the tool not do what it's supposed to do. And so I understand that the goal is to make the clipping issue go away. And I appreciate that SketchUp is looking into that, but I think there's some better ways to do that. So back in 2020, Daniel Tal came up with an extension where you just click a button and it would just reset your camera settings based on your current camera location. So you would click on it and it would just go in and it would manually reset those settings, and you could now see everything properly without the clipping plane clipping out parts of your model. This fix had nothing to do with changing parallel projection mode. Blender allows you to manually set your clipping distances, both the start and the end. So if you have something being clipped out of your model, you just go in and you just change the clipping start and the clipping end location so that you don't have that issue anymore. So in my opinion, there has to be a solution out there that can solve this problem without breaking the position camera tool, because that's basically what it's doing. You're setting a camera, you're trying to look forward, and it's saying, nope, you're seeing everything that's behind the camera. All right, so I'm not sure what the next steps are on something like this. This may just be something where this is the way that things work and this is how we do it moving forward. But I would love to see some more discussion around this. So first off, I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Have you been using the position camera method to create your elevations, and does it affect your workflow? Second, I will link to a forum thread on the SketchUp forums where this has been discussed a little bit. If this is something that actually affects your workflow, you may want to speak up there. Please be respectful. This is not a situation where I want to trash SketchUp, because I think that they're trying to solve problems, but I think this solution maybe has some unintended consequences that they didn't really think about when they put it in place. So I'd love to see some more discussion around this, hear what you think, or maybe you don't really care about this. I'd love to hear about that in the comments down below as well. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.